Eleanor Harrington made a promise to her son. She just made it 20 years too late. "I'm sorry, David, I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked as rain drummed against the black umbrella above her head. The words fell into the wet earth, soaking into the grave of a man who would never hear them. 63 years old, a fortune that could buy anything, and a heart that had been closed for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to truly see someone. But what Eleanor didn't know, as she stood alone in that cemetery on a gray October morning, was that her son had left behind more than memories. He had left behind a secret, and that secret was about to change everything. But before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This story will stay with you long after it ends. It was 6:47 in the morning when Eleanor Harrington's black Mercedes pulled through the iron gates of Riverside Memorial Gardens. The cemetery was empty. It always was at this hour. That's why she came so early, before the groundskeepers started their rounds, before other mourners arrived with fresh flowers and trembling hands. She wanted to be alone with her guilt. Her driver, Marcus, had offered to walk her to the grave. He always did, and she always refused. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice cool and measured, the same voice she used in boardrooms, the same voice that had built an empire and buried a family. Marcus nodded. He knew better than to push. Eleanor stepped out into the drizzle, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. The umbrella opened with a sharp snap, and she began the familiar walk down the stone path, past rows of weathered headstones and marble angels frozen in prayer. She had been coming here every Sunday for 3 years. 3 years since the accident. 3 years since she'd gotten the call that shattered what was left of her carefully controlled world. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm afraid there's been an accident. Your son." She still heard that voice sometimes, late at night when the penthouse was too quiet and sleep wouldn't come. David Harrington, 1986 to 2022. Beloved son, that's what the headstone said. It didn't say estranged son. It didn't say the son who stopped calling. It didn't say the son you drove away, because your expectations were sharper than love. No, headstones never told the whole truth. Eleanor knelt down slowly, her knees protesting against the damp ground. She didn't care. The rain was light, barely more than mist, and it mixed with something else on her cheeks, something she refused to name. "I brought your favorite," she whispered, pulling a single white lily from her coat. She placed it carefully against the cold stone, her fingers tracing the engraved letters of his name. David, her brilliant, sensitive, impossible boy. The son who wanted to be a teacher instead of a CEO. The son who chose compassion over corporate strategy. The son who looked at her one day, 23 years old and tired of fighting, and said, "Mom, I can't be who you want me to be. I'm sorry." And she had let him walk away. She told herself it was for his own good, that he'd come back when he grew up, that he'd realize she'd been right all along. But he never did. Oh, he'd called on birthdays, sent polite Christmas cards, showed up to mandatory family dinners with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But the closeness, the laughter, the late-night talks they used to have when he was small, gone. And now so was he. Eleanor closed her eyes, rain sliding down her face, and let herself feel the weight of all the words she never said. "I'm proud of you. I was wrong. I love you more than the company, more than the legacy, more than my own pride." But the dead don't answer. They don't forgive. They just wait, silent and still, while the living drown in regret. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. She wasn't alone. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks. A branch scraping against stone, or perhaps a bird startled by the rain. But then she heard it again. A voice, small, fragile, barely more than a whisper. "Daddy, I miss you." Eleanor's breath caught. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head. And there, just 10 feet away, sitting cross-legged in front of the grave next to David's, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. His clothes were worn but clean, a faded blue jacket, jeans with a patch on one knee, and sneakers that had seen better days. His hair was dark and curly, damp from the rain, and his small hands rested on the cold surface of the headstone in front of him. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They were open, staring forward, but not at anything. They were unfocused, distant, blind. Eleanor's heart clenched. The boy's fingers moved slowly across the stone, tracing the letters carved into the granite with the careful precision of someone who had done this many times before. "I tried to be brave today, Daddy," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "Like you told me, but it's hard when you're not here." Eleanor felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked away for years. She should leave. She should give this child privacy in his grief. But she couldn't move. The boy tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he smiled, a small, sad smile that broke and mended her heart all at once. "Mama says you're watching over me. She says you can see me even if I can't see you." He paused, his small fingers still tracing. "Is that true, Daddy? Can you see me?" Eleanor's throat tightened. And then, as if the universe had decided she'd been silent long enough, her umbrella slipped, just slightly, just enough. A cascade of cold rainwater slid off the edge and splattered onto the gravel path between them. The boy's head turned sharply in her direction. "Hello?" he called softly, his voice uncertain. "Is someone there?" Eleanor froze. The boy's unseeing eyes were pointed directly at her now, wide and searching, not with sight, but with something deeper. "I can hear you breathing," he said gently, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to hide." Eleanor's hand trembled. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. This wasn't her world. She didn't talk to children. She didn't sit in the rain with strangers and share grief like it was something that could be divided and lessened. But something about this boy, this small, brave, gentle boy, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it alone. "I'm sorry," Eleanor finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to disturb you." The boy shook his head, rain dripping from his curls. "You didn't disturb me," he said simply. "You're sad too, aren't you?" Eleanor blinked. How could he possibly? "I can tell," the boy continued, as if reading her thoughts. "Your breathing sounds heavy, like you've been carrying something too big for too long." A single tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. "Yes," she whispered, "I suppose I have." The boy nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Then, without warning, he reached out his small hand toward her. "My name is Jamal," he said quietly. "What's yours?" Eleanor stared at the small hand extended toward her. It was such a simple gesture, a child's hand, palm up, waiting patiently in the rain. But to Eleanor, it felt like the most complicated thing in the world. When was the last time someone had reached for her like this, without wanting something, without needing her money or her influence or her name, just reaching? "Eleanor," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Eleanor." Jamal's face brightened, and he wiggled his fingers encouragingly. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Eleanor. You can sit with me if you want. The ground's a little wet, but it's okay. Daddy doesn't mind visitors." Eleanor's breath stopped. "Daddy." She looked at the headstone in front of the boy, the one his small fingers had been tracing so lovingly, the one she'd been visiting every Sunday for 3 years. David Michael Harrington, 1986 to 2022, beloved son. "What?" Eleanor's voice came out strangled. "What did you say?" Jamal tilted his head, confused by her tone. "I said Daddy doesn't mind visitors. He likes it when people come to talk to him. It means he's not forgotten." Eleanor's world tilted. This child, this blind, beautiful child, was sitting at David's grave, calling David his father. "Jamal," Eleanor whispered, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Sweetheart, whose grave is this?" Jamal's small hand patted the stone with gentle familiarity. "My daddy's, David Harrington. He was the best daddy in the whole world." The cemetery spun around Eleanor. David had a son. Her son had a child. And she never knew how. Eleanor couldn't form words. She couldn't breathe. "How old are you?" 6. "Well, 6 3/4. My birthday's coming up soon." Jamal responded, 6 years old. Which meant David had been a father for 6 years. He had hidden this precious child, his son, from her for 6 years. Why? "Jamal," Eleanor said, her voice shaking so badly she barely recognized it. "Does your mother know you're here?" Jamal's face fell slightly. "No, Mama's at work. She works a lot. She's a nurse and she has to take extra shifts now that Daddy's gone. He said it so matter-of-factly, but Eleanor could hear the tremor underneath. The brave face a child wears when they're trying not to fall apart. She doesn't know I come here, Jamal continued softly, but I had to. I had something important to tell Daddy. Eleanor's hands were trembling. She pressed them against her knees to steady herself. What did you need to tell him? Jamal reached into his jacket pocket and carefully pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, clearly handled many times. I got an A on my reading test, he said proudly, in Braille. My teacher said I was the fastest learner she'd ever had. His small face glowed with pride, but then it crumpled slightly. Daddy's the one who taught me my first letters. Before the accident. He used to say that just because I can't see words doesn't mean I can't read them. He made me these special letter cards, wooden ones with the Braille dots carved in. He'd sit with me every night, helping me feel each one. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. David had done that. Her son, the son she'd pushed away, the son she'd told wasn't practical enough, wasn't ambitious enough, had sat patiently teaching his blind child to read. He sounds like a wonderful father, Eleanor managed to say. He was, Jamal whispered. Then, quieter still, I miss him so much. Sometimes I forget what his voice sounded like. Mama plays me recordings, but it's not the same as when he was here. Recordings? Eleanor's heart leaped. Your mother has recordings of him? Jamal nodded eagerly. Oh yes, Daddy made lots of them. He said he wanted to make sure I always had his voice, even when he couldn't be there. He'd record himself reading stories, singing songs, telling me about his day. Jamal's small voice grew thick with emotion. He recorded one special message. Right before the accident, Mama won't let me listen to it yet. She says I have to wait until I'm older, but I know it's there. Daddy called it for when Jamal needs to know. Eleanor's mind was racing, a special recording made right before David died. What had her son wanted this child to know? And then a more pressing question surfaced. What had he wanted her to know? Jamal, Eleanor said carefully, did your daddy ever talk about his family, about his mother? The boy's face grew thoughtful. Sometimes, late at night, when he thought I was sleeping, I'd hear him talking to Mama about you. Eleanor's breath caught. About me? Well, about his mama. I didn't know it was you then, but... Jamal paused, his fingers still tracing the letters on his father's headstone. He'd say things like, I wish Mama could see him. I wish she could know how perfect he is. A sob broke from Eleanor's throat. Jamal turned his face toward her, alarmed. Miss Eleanor, are you okay? Eleanor couldn't lie to this child. No, sweetheart, I'm not okay. Is it because you miss your son? Yes, and because I just realized I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. Jamal was quiet for a moment. Then, with the simple wisdom children sometimes possess, he said, Daddy used to tell me that people are like icebergs. We only see the part that's above the water, but there's so much more underneath. He said the secret to loving someone is being curious about what's below the surface. Eleanor's heart shattered and pieced itself back together in the same moment. Your daddy was very, very wise. He was, Jamal agreed. Then he did something that changed everything. He scooted closer to Eleanor and leaned his small body against her side. You're shaking, he said softly. Are you cold? No, Eleanor couldn't finish. Jamal reached for her hand, that same small hand that had been extended in friendship earlier. This time Eleanor took it without hesitation. His fingers were tiny in hers, warm despite the rain, trusting. You can cry if you need to, Jamal said gently. Daddy used to tell me it's okay to cry. He said tears are just love that has nowhere else to go. And Eleanor did cry. For the first time since David's funeral, she let herself truly weep, not the silent, dignified tears she'd shed alone in her penthouse, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she'd kept locked for years. She cried for the grandson she'd never met, for the years she'd lost, for the son who'd felt he had to hide his family from her. And most of all, she cried for the love that had been there all along, waiting beneath the surface, if only she'd been brave enough to look. Jamal didn't pull away. He just held her hand and let her cry, occasionally patting her arm with his free hand, the way someone might comfort a hurt animal. When Eleanor finally caught her breath, she realized something stunning. This child, this beautiful, perceptive, loving child, had done in 10 minutes what 3 years of therapy and 1,000 sleepless nights couldn't do. He'd made her feel again. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "For what?" Jamal smiled, that radiant smile that lit up his whole face. "You're welcome, and thank you for sitting with me. It's nice not to be alone when I visit Daddy." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "Jamal, I need to ask you something important." "Okay, your mama," Eleanor said gently. "What's her name?" "Aisha Bennett." Well, it was Bennett. But she changed it back after Daddy died. She said it hurt too much to keep his name when he wasn't here anymore. Aisha. Eleanor turned the name over in her mind. She'd never heard David mention anyone named Aisha, never seen her at family events, never heard her voice on the phone. David had kept his entire life, his family, hidden from her. The realization hurt worse than the grief. "Does your mama know you talk about your daddy this much?" Eleanor asked. Jamal shrugged. "She lets me when I need to, but I try not to talk about him too much at home. It makes her cry, and she's already so tired. 6 years old, and already trying to protect his mother from pain." Eleanor felt a fierce surge of emotion. Pride and sorrow mixed together. This was David's son. No doubt about it. He had David's kindness, David's sensitivity, David's instinct to put others first. "Miss Eleanor?" Jamal's voice pulled her back. "Yes? Can I ask you something now?" "Of course. You said your son's name was David. And you were sitting right here, at this grave, when I came." Eleanor's heart stopped. The boy continued, his voice careful and measured. "Is David Harrington your son?" There it was. The question that would change everything. Eleanor looked at this child, her grandson, though he didn't know it yet, and made a choice. She chose truth. "Yes," she whispered. "David Harrington was my son." Jamal's mouth fell open. You're my grandma?" Eleanor nodded, tears streaming freely now. "I am. I didn't know about you, Jamal. Your daddy never told me. But yes, I'm your grandmother." For a long moment, Jamal didn't move. He didn't speak. Then, slowly, his small face broke into the biggest smile Eleanor had ever seen. "I have a grandma," he breathed, wonder filling every syllable. "I have a grandma." And before Eleanor could say another word, Jamal launched himself into her arms. "Jamal!" The voice cut through the moment like a knife. Eleanor looked up to see a young woman sprinting toward them, her nurse's scrubs visible under an open jacket, her face twisted with fear. "Jamal, baby, what are you?" The woman stopped dead when she saw Eleanor holding her son. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Eleanor saw everything: fear, recognition, shame, defiance, love. The woman's eyes darted to the headstone, then back to Eleanor, then to Jamal in Eleanor's arms. "Mrs. Harrington," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. So she knew exactly who Eleanor was. "You must be Aisha," Eleanor said quietly. The woman, Aisha, nodded slowly, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "I can explain. Mum." Jamal pulled away from Eleanor, his face bright with excitement. "Mum, this is Miss Eleanor. She's Daddy's mum. She's my grandma." Aisha's face went pale, and Eleanor understood. This meeting wasn't supposed to happen. David's secret was supposed to stay buried with him. The three of them stood frozen in a tableau of shock and recognition. Aisha's chest heaved from her sprint through the cemetery. Her eyes, dark brown and filled with a mixture of emotions Eleanor couldn't quite name, remained locked on Eleanor's face. Jamal, still beaming with joy, reached out toward his mother's voice. "Mom, isn't it wonderful? I have a grandma, just like Tommy at school. He talks about his grandma all the time, and now I have one too." Aisha's expression crumbled. "Jamal, baby, Her voice broke. She cleared her throat and tried again. "How did you get here?" The joy on Jamal's face dimmed slightly. He knew that tone. "I took the buses. Like Mrs. Chen taught me. By yourself? Jamal, we talked about this. You can't—" "I know, Mum. I'm sorry. But I had to tell Daddy about my test. And then I met Miss Eleanor, and she was crying too. And we talked, and Mama, she's Daddy's mama." Aisha closed her eyes, and Eleanor saw a single tear escape down her cheek. I know, baby. I know who she is. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor slowly stood, her expensive coat soaked through, her knees protesting the movement. But she barely noticed. Her entire focus was on the woman before her, the woman who had loved her son, who had given him a child, who had kept that child a secret. How long have you known? Eleanor asked quietly. That I come here every Sunday? Aisha's eyes snapped open. She looked surprised by the question. I didn't know. Not until today. I was finishing my shift when Mrs. Chen called in a panic. She'd gone to check on Jamal and found him gone. I knew exactly where he'd come. She looked down at her son with a mixture of exasperation and fierce love. This isn't the first time he's snuck out to visit his father. I'm sorry, Mum, Jamal said softly, his excitement fading into guilt. I didn't mean to scare you. I know, baby, I know. Aisha knelt down and pulled him into a tight embrace. But you can't do this. The city isn't safe for you to go out alone. I was careful, Mum. Being careful isn't enough, Jamal. You're 6 years old. Eleanor watched the exchange, her heart aching. This was a conversation born of necessity, of a mother stretched too thin, of a child too brave for his own good. Mrs. Harrington, Aisha said, standing up but keeping one hand on Jamal's shoulder. I'm sorry he bothered you. We'll leave now. Bothered me? Eleanor's voice came out sharper than she intended. You think he bothered me? Aisha flinched slightly but held her ground. I just meant that child, Eleanor interrupted, her voice thick with emotion, is the most remarkable person I've met in years. He didn't bother me. He gave me a gift. Aisha's expression shifted to confusion. A gift. He let me see my son through his eyes. He told me things about David that I never knew. He showed me kindness and wisdom that most adults don't possess. Eleanor's voice broke. He called me Grandma. The last word came out as barely a whisper. Aisha's face softened, but there was still wariness in her eyes. Mrs. Harrington, I don't think... Why didn't he tell me? Eleanor asked suddenly. Why didn't David tell me about you? About Jamal? Aisha's jaw tightened. Maybe we should have this conversation another time, without little ears present. Jamal. Aisha's voice was gentle but firm. Why don't you say goodbye to Daddy? Tell him we'll come back next week. Together this time. Jamal hesitated, clearly sensing the tension between the two women. But he was an obedient child, so he turned back to the grave and placed both small hands on the cold stone. Bye, Daddy, I love you, I'll come back soon. He paused, then added in a whisper that both women could still hear, I met Grandma today. I think you'd be happy about that. Eleanor had to look away, blinking rapidly against fresh tears. When Jamal turned back, Aisha took his hand. Come on, baby, we need to get home. Wait, Eleanor said quickly. Please, can we talk? Even for a few minutes. Aisha looked at her for a long moment. Eleanor could see the internal debate playing out behind her eyes, fear, uncertainty, perhaps even anger. Finally, Aisha sighed. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. It should be open. Eleanor nodded gratefully. I'll drive us. My car is just... No, thank you, Aisha said quickly. Too quickly. We'll walk. We'll meet you there. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a start. The coffee shop was small and warm, a stark contrast to the gray morning outside. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, greeted Aisha by name and brought Jamal a hot chocolate without being asked. They were regulars here. This was their world, Eleanor realized, a world David had been part of, a world she'd known nothing about. They settled into a corner booth, Jamal between his mother and Eleanor, sipping his hot chocolate with obvious delight. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor broke the silence. I need to understand, she said quietly. I need to know why my son felt he had to hide you both from me. Aisha wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. Because he knew you wouldn't approve. The words were simple, honest, and they cut Eleanor to the core. How could you possibly know that? You never met me. You never gave me a chance to... Mrs. Eleanor, Aisha interrupted, her voice steady but not unkind. David talked about you all the time. He loved you, but he was also terrified of disappointing you again. Again? Eleanor's voice rose slightly. What do you mean again? Aisha glanced at Jamal, who was focused on his hot chocolate, then back to Eleanor. He told me about the fights, about how you wanted him to take over your company, about how nothing he did was ever quite good enough. Each word was a knife. He also told me, Aisha continued more softly, that you were brilliant, strong, that you'd built an empire from nothing. He admired you, Mrs. Harrington. He just couldn't be what you wanted him to be. Eleanor's hands trembled. So he became a social worker instead, she whispered, helping families in crisis, making barely enough to live on. Making a difference, Aisha corrected gently, saving lives, giving hope to people who had none. He was happy with his choice, until I made him feel guilty about it. Eleanor said. Aisha didn't deny it. Eleanor looked down at her own untouched coffee. When did you meet him? A small smile touched Aisha's lips, the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from her. 7 years ago. I was working in the ER, and he brought in a teenager he'd been counseling. The kid had tried to hurt himself. David stayed all night, even though he didn't have to. He held that boy's hand and talked to him until the crisis passed. Her eyes grew distant, remembering. I was impressed. Most social workers drop off their clients and leave, but David stayed. He always stayed. That sounds like him, Eleanor said softly. We started talking that night, about our work, about why we chose to help people. He told me about growing up with every advantage but feeling like the most important thing, being seen for who he really was missing. Eleanor flinched. We became friends first, Aisha continued. Good friends. He'd come by the hospital after his shifts. We'd grab coffee, from this very shop actually. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. When did it become more? Eleanor asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. About 6 months later. It wasn't planned. We were both surprised by it. But once we stopped fighting it, Aisha's smile widened. He was the best man I've ever known. Aisha's eyes filled with tears. Eleanor felt like she was watching a movie of her son's life, a movie she'd never been invited to see. When did you find out about Jamal? Aisha's hand instinctively moved to cover her son's. About 7 months into our relationship. It was unexpected, but she looked at Jamal with such love that Eleanor's chest ached. The moment David found out, he was over the moon, scared, yes, but so happy. And he didn't tell me, Eleanor stated. No, why? Aisha took a deep breath. Because by then, he knew something was different about the baby. The doctors had seen signs during the ultrasounds. They thought there might be vision problems, and David was terrified. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Terrified of what? Of how you'd react, of what you'd say, of whether you'd accept a grandchild who wasn't perfect. The accusation hung in the air. Eleanor wanted to protest, to say that she would never reject her own grandchild, disability or not, but the truth was, she didn't know. 3 years ago, the woman she'd been, that woman might have seen Jamal's blindness as a flaw, a weakness, something that needed to be fixed rather than accepted. He was wrong about me, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. Was he? Aisha asked quietly. Eleanor couldn't answer. She looked at Aisha. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made my son feel like he couldn't share his life with me. I'm sorry I missed 6 years of Jamal's life. I'm sorry I never got to meet the woman who made David happy. Aisha's eyes glistened. Mrs. Harrington. Eleanor, please, call me Eleanor. Aisha nodded slowly. Eleanor, I don't know what you expect from this, from us, but I need you to understand something. She pulled Jamal closer. Jamal is my world. He's all I have left of David, and I will protect him with everything I am. If you're here because you feel guilty, or because you want to ease your conscience, then I appreciate the apology, but we're fine on our own. Eleanor felt the words like a slap, but she understood them. This was a mother protecting her child, just as she should have protected David. That's not why I'm here, Eleanor said firmly. Or rather, it's not only why I'm here. Then why? Eleanor looked at Jamal, at the curve of his face that was so like David's, at the gentle way he held himself, at the wisdom in his young voice. Because in the span of 30 minutes, this remarkable child showed me more grace and love than I've felt in years. Because he's my grandson and I've already missed too much. Because I'm 63 years old and I'm tired of living in a tomb of regret. Her voice grew stronger. Because David left him here, Aisha, on this earth, with you. And if my son trusted you enough to build a life with you, to have a child with you, to love you the way he clearly did, then maybe, you could trust me enough to let me try to be part of that life. Aisha stared at her. You don't know us. You don't know what our life is like. Then let me learn. It's not easy. Jamal needs special care, specialists, therapies, equipment. And even with my nursing salary and working extra shifts, money isn't an issue, Eleanor interrupted. Aisha's expression hardened. I don't want your money. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering family. But I'm also a realist, Aisha. You're exhausted. I can see it in your eyes. You work double shifts just to make ends meet. You can barely watch your own son because you're too busy trying to survive. Aisha's jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it. Let me help, Eleanor said softly. Not because I'm trying to buy my way into your lives, but because you're all the family I have left, and because it's what David would have wanted. How do you know what David would have wanted? Aisha asked, but there was less edge to her voice now. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands shook as she opened her photo album, the private one she'd never shown anyone. She turned the screen toward Aisha. Because he sent me this. 3 days before he died. On the screen was a photo Eleanor had looked at 1,000 times. David, happier, sitting in what looked like a hospital room. And in his arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a tiny newborn baby. Below the photo was a text. Mom, there's someone I want you to meet someday. When you're ready, when I'm ready. His name is Jamal and he's perfect. I hope you'll think so too. Love, D. Aisha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I never responded, Eleanor whispered. I was angry, hurt that he hadn't told me sooner, confused about why he was sending me photos of a baby without explanation, so I didn't respond. And 3 days later, her voice broke. 3 days later, he was gone, and I never got to tell him that yes, I thought Jamal was perfect, that I wanted to meet him, that I was ready to try. Tears streamed down both women's faces now. Jamal, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully understand, squeezed both their hands. Don't cry, he said. Please don't cry. Daddy wouldn't want you to be sad. Aisha pulled him close, pressing her face into his hair. Eleanor wiped her eyes. I can't change the past, Aisha. I can't bring David back. I can't undo the years of distance or the mistakes I made. But I'm here now, and I'm asking, begging for, a chance to be the grandmother Jamal deserves. The grandmother I should have been from the beginning. Aisha was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and placed her hand over Eleanor's. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The rain had stopped by the time they left the coffee shop. Eleanor walked beside Aisha and Jamal, her heart lighter than it had been in years, but also terrified. She'd been given a second chance, a miracle she didn't deserve, and she had no idea how not to ruin it. Miss Eleanor? Jamal's small voice broke through her thoughts. Yes, sweetheart. Can I hold your hand? Mum says I should always hold someone's hand when we walk near the street. Eleanor's throat tightened. She extended her hand, and Jamal's small fingers wrapped around hers with complete trust. It was such a simple thing, a child's hand in hers, but it meant everything. Jamal, Aisha said gently, we need to catch the bus home. Can you say goodbye to Miss Eleanor? Actually, Eleanor said quickly, I was hoping, if it's okay with your mother, that I could spend a little more time with you both. Maybe I could drive you home? Aisha hesitated. Eleanor added quickly, or I could visit another day, whatever makes you comfortable. I don't want to impose. Jamal tugged his mother's sleeve. Mom, can Grandma come see our house, please? I want to show her my Braille books. And the letter cards Daddy made me. The word Grandma coming from his lips still made Eleanor's heart skip. Aisha looked between her son's hopeful face and Eleanor's tentative expression. Okay, she said finally. But just for a little while. It's not much. Our apartment is small. I don't care about the size, Eleanor said honestly. I just want to see where Jamal lives, where David spent time. The drive to Aisha's apartment took 20 minutes through neighborhoods Eleanor rarely visited. The buildings grew older, the streets narrower. This wasn't poverty, but it was clearly working class. People who lived paycheck to paycheck, who knew their neighbors, who made do with what they had. Jamal sat in the back seat, chattering happily about his school, his teacher, his friend Miguel, who also read Braille. Miguel's been blind since he was born, just like me, Jamal explained. But his family is from Mexico, and he teaches me Spanish words. I can say hola and gracias and te quiero. That means I love you. That's wonderful, Eleanor said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Your daddy would be so proud of how much you're learning. I hope so. I try really hard. Mum says Daddy was the smartest person she ever met, so I want to be smart too. Aisha reached back and squeezed his knee. You're already smart, baby, and kind, and brave. Those things matter more than any test score. They pulled up to a modest apartment building, 4 stories, brick, with a small patch of grass out front where a few children were playing. We're on the 3rd floor, Aisha said as they got out. There's no elevator, so we have to take the stairs. Jamal knows them by heart now. 39 steps total. Eleanor watched as Jamal confidently navigated to the building entrance, his hand trailing along the railing he clearly knew well. Inside, the building was clean but worn. The wallpaper was faded, the carpet thin. But there were touches of care, a potted plant on the landing, children's artwork taped to some doors, the smell of someone cooking something delicious. Jamal counted the steps quietly to himself as they climbed. 37, 38, 39. We're here. Aisha unlocked the door, number 3 degrees Celsius, and they stepped inside. The apartment was small, just as Aisha had warned, but Eleanor immediately saw love in every corner. The living room walls were covered with Jamal's artwork, abstract paintings he'd created using texture and touch. There were photos too. David grinning at the camera, David holding baby Jamal, David and Aisha at what looked like a park. Welcome to our home, Aisha said quietly. Eleanor's eyes were drawn to a corner of the room where a small shelf held Jamal's things. Carefully organized Braille books, wooden letter cards, a collection of textured balls, and a teddy bear that looked well loved. That's Mr. Buttons, Jamal said proudly, following the direction of Eleanor's gaze with that uncanny awareness blind children often develop. Daddy gave him to me when I was 3. He said Mr. Buttons would keep me safe when he couldn't be there. Eleanor had to look away, blinking hard. Would you like some tea? Aisha offered. I know it's not fancy. Tea would be lovely. Thank you. While Aisha moved to the small kitchen, Jamal took Eleanor's hand and led her to the couch. Sit here, Grandma. This is the comfy spot. Eleanor sat, and Jamal immediately climbed up beside her. Can I show you something special? Of course. Jamal got down and carefully walked to a bookshelf, his hands trailing along familiar surfaces until he found what he was looking for. He returned with a wooden box, simple, handmade, with carved edges. Daddy made this, Jamal said, his fingers lovingly tracing the lid. It's where I keep my most important things. He opened it carefully. Inside were treasures, a smooth stone, a seashell, a small harmonica, and a folded letter. This stone is from the park where Daddy proposed to Mum, Jamal explained, holding it up. He told me the story. He said he got down on one knee and almost dropped the ring in the pond. Eleanor smiled through her tears. The shell is from the only time we went to the beach. I couldn't see the ocean, but I could hear it. And Daddy described the waves to me. He said they looked like liquid diamonds dancing in the sun. Jamal picked up the harmonica, and this was Daddy's. He'd play it sometimes when I couldn't sleep, just soft songs that made me feel safe. He held it out to Eleanor. Do you want to hold it? Eleanor took the harmonica with trembling hands. It was worn, the metal dull from use. She brought it close, imagining David's lips on it, his breath creating music for his son. It's beautiful, Jamal. The letter is the most special, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's the one I'm not allowed to read yet. Mum keeps it here for when I'm older. Eleanor looked at Aisha, who had returned with tea. David wrote it a week before the accident, Aisha said quietly. He had a feeling. I don't know why. Maybe parents just sense these things. He wrote letters to both of us. Mine said that if anything ever happened to him, I should make sure Jamal knew how much he was loved, and that when Jamal was ready to give him his letter. What does it say? Eleanor asked. I don't know. It's sealed. It's for Jamal when he's old enough to understand. Eleanor nodded, understanding the sacredness of that. Jamal carefully put everything back in the box except the harmonica. Grandma, would you like to hear me read? I would love that more than anything. Jamal retrieved one of his Braille books and settled back beside Eleanor. His small fingers moved across the raised dots with practiced precision. The Little Prince, he announced. This is my favorite. It's about a boy who lives on a tiny planet and visits Earth and learns important things. He began to read, his voice clear and confident. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Eleanor's breath caught. Jamal continued reading, and Eleanor found herself mesmerized, not just by the story, but by this child's pure joy in the act of reading. The way his face lit up with each word, the way he paused dramatically at the right moments, the way he'd clearly read this book dozens of times and still found wonder in it. That's my favorite line, Jamal said when he finished the chapter, about seeing with the heart. Because that's what I do. I can't see people's faces, but I can see who they really are inside. He turned toward Eleanor. Like you. When I first touched your face, I could feel the sadness, but underneath there's something else. Something warm. Like you've been cold for a long time, but you're starting to remember what warm feels like. Eleanor couldn't speak. This child, this extraordinary child, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. Can I ask you something, Grandma? Anything. Will you tell me about Daddy when he was little? Mum tells me stories about when they were together, but I don't know what he was like when he was a kid, when he was my age. And just like that, Eleanor was given the gift she'd thought lost forever, the chance to share David with someone who wanted to know him. Your daddy, Eleanor began, her voice thick with emotion, was a lot like you. He was gentle and kind even as a little boy. He'd bring home injured birds and try to nurse them back to health. He'd share his lunch with kids who forgot theirs. He'd spend hours reading, just like you, completely lost in other worlds. Jamal leaned against her, listening with rapt attention. He loved music. I remember when he was 7, about your age, he begged for piano lessons, and when he played, the whole house would fill with this beautiful sound. He'd make up songs about everything, songs about rainstorms and butterflies and his pet goldfish. Daddy played piano? Jamal's eyes widened. I didn't know that. Aisha looked surprised too. He did, Eleanor confirmed. He was quite talented. I had a grand piano in our house, and he'd practice for hours. Do you still have it? Jamal asked excitedly. The piano? I do. Could I touch it someday? Could you show me how Daddy played? Eleanor's heart swelled. Yes, I would love that. They spent the next hour like that. Eleanor sharing stories, Jamal asking questions, Aisha occasionally adding details from David's adult life. Together, they wove a tapestry of a man who had been loved by all of them, who had shaped all of them, who was gone but somehow still present in every word. Eleanor learned that David had taught Jamal to identify birds by their songs, that he'd invented a game where they'd describe colors through feelings. Red was warm like a hug, blue was calm like a lullaby, yellow was happy like laughing. Jamal shared that his daddy had promised to take him to a symphony one day so he could experience music the way it was meant to be experienced, with his whole body feeling the vibrations, letting sound paint pictures in his mind. We were supposed to go this year, Jamal said softly, for my birthday. But then, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Eleanor made a decision. Jamal, what if we went together to the symphony for your birthday? If your mama says it's okay. Jamal's face transformed with joy. Really, you mean it? I mean it. He threw his arms around her neck, and Eleanor held him tight, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling his small heart beating against hers. This was what she'd missed. This pure, uncomplicated love. Thank you, Grandma, Jamal whispered. Thank you for not leaving. Eleanor's tears fell freely now. Thank you for finding me, she whispered back. Thank you for teaching me how to see. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy morning in the cemetery. 3 weeks that had changed everything. Eleanor stood in her penthouse living room, looking out at the city skyline. But for the first time in years, she wasn't seeing it through the fog of loneliness and regret. She was seeing it the way Jamal had taught her to see, with her heart. Behind her, the grand piano that had sat silent for 3 years was being tuned. She'd called the technician, the day after meeting Jamal, wanting it perfect for when he came to visit. And today was that day. Her phone buzzed. A text from Aisha. "We're downstairs. Jamal is so excited he can barely stand still." Eleanor smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Come up. I'm ready." She'd spent the last 3 weeks carefully, slowly building a relationship with her grandson and his mother. Dinners twice a week at their apartment, where Eleanor learned to appreciate simple meals around a small table filled with laughter. Afternoons at the park, where Jamal would describe the world through sound and touch, while Eleanor pushed him on the swings. She'd attended one of his Braille reading sessions at school and watched with pride as he read flawlessly in front of his class. She'd met Mrs. Chen, the kind neighbor who looked after Jamal when Aisha worked late. She'd met Miguel and his family. She'd slowly entered the world David had built, a world so different from her own, yet so much richer in the ways that mattered. And today, she was bringing them into hers. "Grandma," Jamal's voice echoed through the hallway before Eleanor even opened the door. She opened it to find him practically vibrating with excitement, his hand gripping his mother's tightly. "We're here. We're at your house. Welcome," Eleanor said warmly, kneeling down to his level. "I'm so glad you came." Jamal reached out and hugged her immediately, something that had become their ritual. Every greeting, every goodbye, always a hug. Aisha stepped in behind him, looking around with wide eyes. "Eleanor, this place is too big," Eleanor finished with a slight smile. "I know, it's been too big and too empty for a very long time, but today it feels just right." She guided them inside, watching as Jamal's hands explored his new environment, trailing along the walls, touching the furniture, building a mental map of the space. "It smells different here," Jamal observed, "like flowers and something sweet." "I had fresh flowers delivered this morning," Eleanor explained. "And I baked cookies. Well, I tried to bake cookies. Mrs. Chen gave me a recipe." Aisha laughed, a sound Eleanor had come to treasure. "You baked? Don't sound so shocked. I can follow directions." Eleanor paused. "They might be a little burnt on the bottom, but the tops look acceptable." Jamal giggled. "I bet they're perfect, Grandma." Eleanor led them to the living room, where the piano waited. The moment they entered, Jamal stopped. "What's that sound?" he asked, tilting his head. "That's the piano tuner finishing up. He's making sure every note is perfect. Can I hear it? The piano? That's exactly why you're here." The tuner finished and quietly excused himself. Eleanor guided Jamal to the piano bench and helped him sit. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Touch it, explore it." Jamal's small hands reached out reverently. His fingers traced the smooth wood, the cool ivory keys, the gold lettering that spelled out the maker name. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "I can feel that it's beautiful." Eleanor sat beside him, Aisha standing nearby, her phone ready to record the moment. "Your daddy used to sit right here," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Right where you are now. He'd play for hours and I'd sit in that chair over there, pretending to read but really just listening." "What did he play?" "Everything. Classical pieces, popular songs, music he made up himself." Eleanor placed her hands on the keys. "He taught himself to play by ear eventually. He could hear a song once and recreate it." She played a simple melody, one she remembered David playing over and over when he was Jamal's age. Jamal listened, his face glowing. "That's pretty. What is it?" "It's called Clair de Lune. It means light of the moon. Your daddy said it sounded like moonlight would sound if moonlight could sing." Jamal's smile could have lit the whole city. "Can you teach me?" And so Eleanor did. She guided his small fingers to the right keys, showed him the pattern, helped him find the rhythm. He was tentative at first, but then, just like his father, he began to understand. The notes weren't perfect, they were halting and uncertain. But they were the most beautiful sounds Eleanor had ever heard, because they were Jamal's, her grandson's, David's sons. After several minutes, Jamal played the simple melody all the way through without help. When he finished, Aisha was crying. Eleanor was crying. Even Jamal had tears on his cheeks. "Daddy would be so proud," Jamal whispered. "He would be," Eleanor agreed. "And I am too, so proud." Jamal threw his arms around her, and Eleanor held him close, feeling the weight of 3 years of grief finally beginning to lift. "Grandma?" Jamal said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad I went to the cemetery that day. I'm glad I found you." "So am I, my darling boy. So am I." Later, after cookies and milk, after Jamal had explored every corner of the penthouse he could reach, after Aisha had finally relaxed enough to sit on the expensive couch without looking nervous, Eleanor brought out a folder. "There's something I want to discuss with you both," she said. Aisha's expression immediately became guarded. "Eleanor, please, just listen. I've set up a trust fund for Jamal's education. Whatever he needs, special schools, equipment, college, anything, it's there. I'm also covering his medical expenses, all of them, any specialists he needs to see, any therapies that might help him. Not to change him," she added quickly, seeing Aisha's expression, "but to give him every opportunity to thrive exactly as he is." Aisha shook her head. "That's too much. We're not your charity project." "No," Eleanor said firmly, "you're my family. And I've wasted enough time pretending money matters more than people. Let me do this, please. Not because you need me to, but because I need to. Because this is how I can honor David's memory. By taking care of the people he loved most." Aisha looked at Jamal, who was listening intently. "Mom," Jamal said softly, "I think Daddy would want us to say yes. I think he'd want Grandma to be part of our family. Really part of it. Out of the mouths of babes." Aisha's resolve crumbled. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, but on one condition. Anything. You stop treating this like a transaction. You're not buying your way into our lives. You're already in them. You're Jamal's grandmother. You're—" She paused, then smiled. "Your family. That's enough." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "And," Aisha continued, "you come to dinner every Sunday, not at a restaurant. At our place. We'll cook together. All 3 of us. Even if I burn the cookies. Especially if you burn the cookies." They laughed together, 3 people who had found each other through grief and were choosing to build something beautiful from the broken pieces. The next Sunday, Eleanor found herself back at the cemetery. But this time she wasn't alone. Jamal walked beside her, his small hand in hers. Aisha walked on his other side carrying fresh flowers. They stood together at David's grave, 3 generations connected by love. "Hi, Daddy," Jamal said, his hand resting on the headstone. "I brought Grandma and Mom with me today. We're all together now, just like you wanted." Eleanor knelt down, placing her own flowers beside Aisha's. "I'm sorry it took me so long, David," she whispered. "I'm sorry for so many things, but I promise you, I promise, I'll take care of them. I'll love them the way you did, the way I should have loved you." She felt Jamal's small hand on her shoulder. "He knows, Grandma. He can see us, and I think he's smiling." Eleanor looked up at this remarkable child who had taught her how to see with her heart. "I think you're right." They stood there together as the sun broke through the clouds, warming the cemetery with golden light. And for the first time since David's death, Eleanor felt at peace. Not because the pain was gone, it would never be fully gone, but because she had finally learned what her son had tried to teach her all along, that love doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't require conditions or achievements or meeting expectations. Love justice, and it's best seen not with the eyes, but with the heart. Eleanor Harrington had spent 63 years building an empire, but it took a 6-year-old blind boy to teach her what really mattered. Jamal didn't need her money, though she gave it freely. He didn't need her connections or her status or her power. He just needed her love. And in giving it, she found the one thing her wealth could never buy, a family. David had left behind more than grief. He'd left behind hope. He'd left behind a son who saw the world more clearly than anyone with perfect vision. And he'd left behind a chance for redemption, not just for Eleanor, but for all of them. Because sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the smallest packages. Sometimes the clearest vision comes from those who cannot see. And sometimes the longest journey home begins with a child's hand reaching out in the rain. Eleanor had learned to see with her heart, and she would never be blind again. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment telling us what moment made you cry. What did Jamal teach you about seeing with your heart? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters in life. Because at the end of the day, we all need to be reminded, the most important things are invisible to the eye, but they're crystal clear to the heart.